Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the American University of Armenia. My name is Irshad Mazarif, and I represent the master's program in teaching English as a foreign language here at this university, as well as the Center for Research in Applied Linguistics. And we're very thankful to British Council in Armenia for bringing this special guest tonight. And I would like to invite at this point the director of the British Council Armenia, Arivik Seribikan.
Dear teachers, I want to welcome you here. Welcome all the Armenian teachers, but also teachers who came a far way to be with us today. I met several guests from Georgia, from Iran, from Singapore. There might be more. I'm really happy. Welcome to Armenia and welcome to this event. British Council has a history of more than 80 years, and English and working with English teachers and English professionals have always been our first priority. And in Armenia, for 15 years, we have been engaging with you, and the growing number shows that our relationship is actually mutual, and I'm really happy that whatever we do is actually needed in Armenia, and it gives us more hope and opportunities and strength to do more for you, and I hope that there will be more opportunities in future. I'm really happy that today we have a special guest here with us, Scott Thornbury, and he will be with us for the upcoming 3 days. I want to thank the American University of Armenia. We have a long cooperation with this institution, and only with the help... Am I doing something? Okay. And with the help of this institution and in partnership with all other institutions, we managed to reach more people. We managed to do more for you. So thank you for being such a great partner for us. And it's a special day because today we have our regional director, Andy Williams, with us, and I want to invite him to greet you before you will start enjoying your lecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arivik. Good evening. I would say good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Sure.
But I don't see many gentlemen here. Hello, gentlemen of the English language teaching world in Armenia. But also hello to our female teachers as well. As Arivik said, our work supporting English language development in Armenia has been a priority for the last 14 years, ever since we opened our office here. And of course we do a range of English language teacher development activities, ranging from face-to-face to online materials to blended programs. And it's really important for us. In the last year alone, our British Council in Armenia supported about 1,300 teachers and supported about 400,000 learners of English, which I think is really impressive. And so it gives me a good opportunity just to thank Arivik and our British Council team here in Armenia, because I have seen over the last couple of days that they do a wonderful job. So thank you, Arivik and the team. This annual teacher development event is, of course, a really important part of our year. And through the activities over the weekend, we hope to provide teachers in Armenia with the professional development that they require. We think it's really important that you have the latest thinking and the latest methodologies, and we think it's really important that you have the very best from the ELT world. We've had about 800 registrations for the next couple of days, and we will be live streaming these events to places as far afield as China. So it's very, very exciting. I'd really like to thank our friends here at the American University of Armenia. I think together we can reach and support more and more teachers, and I think together we're much stronger in the field of teacher development. So we really value working with you, and thank you for hosting this event. So, without further ado, I'm absolutely delighted and honoured and privileged to invite Scott to the stage, and I know you're going to have a great time. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you, British Council, Ada, for making this possible. It's long overdue, and it's great to be here finally. So I sincerely thank you so much, and thank you for making me feel very welcome here, and thank the American University of Armenia for hosting this in this fabulous building and this wonderful town. So let's get going. This is the first of 5 talks that I'll be doing. They're kind of notionally linked. The connections I've been making, some of the themes will come up again and again. And this one sort of introduces and sets the scene, I think, for a number of issues that I want to talk about. Now, you don't have to see all the 5 talks. It's not like watching, I don't know, Breaking Bad. You don't have to wait till the end to find out who did it. They are kind of, as I say, linked. And also, we're being live streamed, so no doubt you'll be able to catch up with them at some other date. Okay, so let's get going. This talk emerged out of a project I was involved in about 10 years ago. I was writing a book called The A to Z of ELT, published by Macmillan. You might know it. And in fact, I'm happy to say that I'm in the process of just finalizing the 2nd edition of that book, and that will be out next year. But what was interesting about writing this book, you're writing a kind of dictionary encyclopedia. And so you're looking at all the things that relate to our field, English language teaching, that begin with A, and then B, and then C, and so on. And there's a kind of what I call serendipity involved in this. That occasionally you'd see connections that weren't normally there, just because 2 ideas begin with the same letter. So suddenly they're on the same page. And this amused me that there were these kind of accidental juxtapositions of ideas, and certain themes started to emerge. And that's what I want to talk to you about and look at some of the things that came up which began with M. Now, I've already accidentally shown you the first slide, which is the list of things. I would have asked you to predict what some of the important words beginning with M are that relate to English language teaching. Would you like to shout some out? Methods, memory, motivation, material, monitoring, modeling, mentoring. It's a rich field. It's a great letter. Managing, exactly. So let's have a look. These are the ones, see how well you do. These are the ones, whoops, these are the ones, hello? These are the ones I'm going to deal with. So we got some of those, yeah? Another one, yep. That came up, management. Mediation, did anybody mention that? Yeah, well. And finally, methodology. Okay, so let's start with method. And this does relate to a talk that I'll be giving tomorrow on the secret history of methods. But the term method, I'm sure those of you who are studying methods, and I've met some of you already this evening who are studying on methods courses on the master's program, will know that the term method has got, it's got negative associations now. The idea that it's sort of like one size fits all kind of idea, that a method that is typically devised in what some people call the center, that is to say the English-speaking academic center, the United States, Britain, Australia, etc. And that is then the idea that it percolates out into the periphery and applies in remote or non-native speaking parts of the world. This is felt to have been a little bit colonial, to say the least. And so it was around about the 1990s that the term approach was used in preference to method, because approach sounded a little less kind of like an imposition, less prescriptive. It's a sort of, it's fuzzier, it's more as I say, it's less top-down, if you like. And so we get the communicative approach, for example, not the communicative method. But actually, if you pick it apart, there's not that much difference between... It's interesting, actually, here's a footnote. I'm writing another book at the moment. Nobody knows this except my publishers, and you're the first to know. And it's a sort of pocket book about the history of methods. And it's very interesting and slightly depressing to realize that it is true that most of the methods that have been promoted for teaching language have been designed by native speaker males to be used by non-native speaker females. So what's the justice in that? And it's really depressing. You look back, all these kind of dead white males have come up with a method. It was the direct method, Maximilian Berlitz, and then there was another one, then another one, and another one. There's women who've written about methods, like Diane Larson Freeman, but there's not many people who've invented methods. It seems something you have to do to prove yourself as an academic, as a male kind of methodologist. You invent a method. But I think that, hopefully, that mentality, there's another word beginning with M, mentality of males dominating methods is a thing of the past. So yeah, so we got the kind of the approach. And then those of you, again, who've been studying this will have read that in the 1990s, people like Kumar Ahmedavalu were talking about we're now in the post-method era, and people like Prabhu saying there is no method and there's very good reasons why. So we felt we'd emerged out of that paradigm. But of course, more recently, people have been very skeptical that we've actually merged. And there's an academic who's working not a million miles from here, who Ramon Akbari, the Iranian, who wrote a very good paper a few years ago in TESOL Quarterly, and he said, you know, the concept of method hasn't been replaced by the concept of post-method or no method or approach. What's happened is that method has been replaced by textbooks, basically. The teachers don't teach to methods, they teach to a particular textbook. And why? Because they have busy lives. They teach 30 hours a week. They don't have time to be kind of being post-method and critical and Freirean and all that kind of thing. They've just got to get on with it, and they're not very well paid. And I think he's got a point that actually, if you go into where the vast number of contexts in which English is being taught, you'll find that people are following the book. And the book is, in a sense, enshrines a method, but the teachers are not necessarily aware of the method in it. I don't know, I'm throwing that out, if you agree or not. And I'll be talking a bit about this in subsequent talks tomorrow and on Sunday, but it relates to the M for materials too, that maybe we're in a materials-driven situation rather than a method-driven one. But I'm throwing that out. Nevertheless, if you going around methods courses, talking to teachers and looking at publicity on the internet particularly, or on in-flight magazines, you see there's no shortage of people now still promoting methods. I mean, these are just taken off the internet. Easy and effective method. The word method hasn't gone away. The pro-natural method for learning English, whatever that is. And this is one I found in India a few years ago, the microwave method. Can you imagine? There's this hunger for methods, because methods are associated with kind of system and science and modernity. Yeah, they're kind of modern you. And I'm often asked when I travel around the world, and I go to places like the remotest part of South America, and people will say to me, what's the latest method? As if it has to come from the center out. And as if there were the need for one. And I don't know, but there's this hunger for methods. So as David Block, writing about this recently, says, it seems that despite the applied linguists saying, no, we're in the post-method condition, or there's no method, despite this, we're surrounded by the concept of method, and it retains a great vitality at the grassroots level. I think one of the reasons why the idea of methods, theoretically at least, became discredited as people were more interested. There was a change of interest in, well, going some time back, in terms of what is it that really determines success in second language learning? Is it the method? But given that the same method with the same students produces different results, or different methods with different students produces the same results, so what's the variable here? Is it the method or is there something else? And so people started to look what's going on inside the learners, not what they're being subject to. That maybe the method really is just the wallpaper, it's the context, it's not that important. Maybe what we should be looking at is the internal psychological factors. And hence that was the interest in psycholinguistics and particularly in motivation. And in fact, going way back, I mean, this is one of the most quoted quotes in the literature and it goes way back to 1967. Pitt Cordus said, "Let us say that, given motivation, it is inevitable that a human being will learn a second language if he is exposed to the language data. All you need is motivation. That's the magic factor. And data. I mean, you need to be exposed to the language. But if there's a motivation there, it doesn't matter what the method is that the learner will learn. Do you agree?" Yes. I certainly sense here in Armenia there's enormous motivation to learn English amongst the people I've met. And it's shown in the success of the people I've been dealing with, even today, just wandering around the town, that there is a hunger for English, and that hunger is showing spectacular results. I don't see it where I live in Spain. I live in Spain because there's no hunger for English because they've already got a language which is a global language, and they don't actually like the idea of having to learn another one. And so you don't find waiters or taxi drivers or whatever speaking fluent English like you do here. So anyway, so the motivation obviously is really, really important. But is it as simple as that? Is it as simple as that? And we know that, motivation comes and goes. That's the problem with motivation. One day you can get up and say, yes. And I've got lots of stories I can tell you, sad stories about my motivation and how it's fluctuated in terms of learning Spanish in Spain. But it's different. It's different from the time of the day of the week, the time of the year, who I'm with, etc. It's not an easy variable to tap, and it's not one that's necessarily easily controlled. How do you control what goes on inside of the learner? Well, we do, in a sense. This is what good teachers do. And maybe we're actually one of the most motivating aspects of motivation is the teacher. And this is why this is a quotation I love. And again, it's fairly old. And she says, motivation is a feeling nurtured primarily by the classroom teacher in the learning situation. So it's not something the learner brings necessarily, or if they bring it, it's the job of the teacher to nurture it. And how does she do this? The moment of truth, the enhancement of motivation occurs when the teacher closes the classroom door, greets his or her students with a warm, welcoming smile, and proceeds to interact with various individuals by making comments or asking questions which indicate personal concern. And that's a theme that I want to come up with both in this talk and in subsequent talks over the weekend. Questions which indicate personal concern. So I love this because I think it says it's not just the student's motivation, but it's what the teacher does with that. And I love this word, nurtured. It's something that you nurture. You can't impose motivation, but you can nurture the motivation that's there. And the very fact that learners are in the classroom suggests that there's a tiny seed of motivation which can be nurtured. And we need to do that. We need to find that little seed. And another nice, more recent summary of what makes for good motivation. This was based on a survey done with students across a large survey of students done in Hungary. And they found that there were 10 at least commandments that could factor into increasing learners' motivation. And I'm not going to talk you all the way through them, but these slides, by the way, are available on my website, and I'll give the address at the end so you don't. But the ones I want to highlight are particularly these two, 6 and 8. And this is something the teacher can do, is make the language classes interesting and personally. Remember, it comes back to this, asking questions about things that concern the students personally. Personalize the language learning experience. And it's so easy not to do that. It's so easy to forget. It's so easy to think, oh my God, I've got to teach the present perfect continuous today because it's in the exam. So I don't have time to personalize the learning experience. I've got all these pressures on me. I've got the syllabus, I've got the exams, I've got the course book, etc. But if we don't make time for that, then this is where the learner's motivation potentially drops. And here's a good example of a teacher who didn't make time for it. This is from a transcript of an actual class in Mexico. And so the class has begun. The teacher's taking the register, calling the names, and the teacher starts chatting to the students. And the teacher says, well then, Jorge, did you have a good weekend? Yes. What did you do? I got married. Teacher, smiling. Huh? You got married? 7-second pause. You certainly had a good weekend then. Now, says the teacher, turn to page 56 in your books. You remember the last time we were talking about biographies? Blah, 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 blah. So the teacher checks the book and the lesson plan while the other students talk to Jorge in Spanish about his wedding. Why? Because it's much more interesting than page 56. Now, we know why the teacher did that. As I said, there's all sorts of pressures on the teacher and that, but what a missed opportunity. Because the students are going to talk about it anyway, but they're going to talk about it in Spanish. Why not talk about it in English? Just because it's not in the syllabus, it doesn't, get 5-10 minutes. It's wedding, for heaven's sake, and it's intrinsically interesting. So I know we've all been in this situation where something unexpected has come up, and it's often very, very difficult at the point to know how to deal with it, and how to deal with it in the language that the students are supposed to be learning. But I do think it's something we need to pay more attention to, because if I am sure that that teacher had picked up on that Jorge's wedding, not only would Jorge have felt good, or even better, but that this other learners will never have forgotten that lesson. Ah, that was the lesson when we talked about Jorge's wedding. Ah, that was the lesson. And in fact, this leads me on to the next M, which is meaning. I'm not sure if that came up, but as, again, another very old quote, but written in 1966, I think that's before most of you were born, but it seems to me so important because this was in an article as part of a collection of papers that were addressing the principles underlining the communicative approach, the communicative approach, not the communicative method, in 1970s. And this paper, written even earlier, was in a sense had predicted, if you like, or the thinking behind the communicative approach, or anticipated at least, by saying things like this: an important test of our success as language teachers, an important test of our success as language teachers is not how many people we get through the exams. It's not whether the students know the present perfect continuous. We're language teachers, and what does language do? Language communicates meaning. So an important test of our success as language teachers is the ability of our students to choose what they want to say, or to say what they want, and to give them the means to say that. And this seems to be very insightful, because if you look at the kind of language textbooks which were being used in this period, you get reading exercises like this. The neck is between the head and the body. Is this something you really want to say? What is there between the body and the head? The neck. Which is your neck? Is that your, no, is that, is this your neck? Is this your neck? Excuse me. No, it is your neck. I have 2 arms. How many arms have I? Okay, so, I mean, this was before 1966, but it didn't seem to matter in those days that what learners were practicing had absolutely no relation, not just to themselves, but to any conceivable use of English. It was just practice of the grammar structures. So it wasn't empowering learners to make the kinds of meanings that they wanted to. But then things got better. The communicative approach came along, and we get exercises like this, pre-reading task. So before they read the text, they ask questions. What do you think the life of a nun is like? What I always do, sometimes do, and never do. I don't think we should... Which of the following do you think are important to know? I mean, you can see the thinking behind this. It's trying to situate the text and make it interesting for the learners. So these are real questions, but they are, in a sense, also completely divorced from the learners' real lives, unless they're nuns. At the end of this unit, after they've read this exercise, then there's finally a discussion, work in groups, look at the list, and exercise 2 of the pre, which of them are important to you? Okay, so that's going back to this list, sport, clothes, prayer, food and drink, etc. Now that seems like a great question to ask. But the thing is, it comes right at the end of the sequence. So what's going to happen to it, probably? It's not going to be done, because the teacher, oh, we're out of time. Okay, we'll do this some other time. You know, that's what happened. If you moved that to the beginning of the lesson, what a difference that might make. So we're going to do this discussion before we do the reading. And then we'll talk about the nun if we have time. But this is likely to generate the kinds of meanings that the students want to talk about. So it's just a matter of flipping the lesson from the discussion at the end to putting it at the beginning. The personalized discussion, and then you're starting to get somewhere. And there's whole methodologies which suggest that this is a good thing to do, and research too. For example, I don't know whether you know this one. Well, this is not a good picture of it. I couldn't find a picture. But there's a method which was developed in the 1960s called community language learning, not communicative, but community. Have you heard of that one? It was one of these kind of what they call niche methods. It was a sort of humanistic thing. And basically what it involved was students sitting around, much like this, in a group, and they would generate a conversation about anything, whatever they wanted to talk about. And the teacher works around the outside. And whenever a student wants to say something in the target language, let's say it's English, but they speak Spanish, they'll say to the teacher, ¿Cómo se dice, cómo estás tú? You know, how do you say, how are you, or how was your weekend, and that? And the teacher will translate into the ear of the student, and then the student will answer. And then that sentence is recorded, yeah? Onto in those days, there was a kind of reel-to-reel tape recorder, but it can be recorded now on a mobile phone. And then the student who has been asked the question then answers it. And gradually you build up a conversation which is laid down on the recording. So it's available then to go back and listen to. But the conversation is completely generated by the students themselves. And I've done this as a kind of technique myself with small classes. It doesn't work with big classes. Or if it does, you have to put them in different groups. But then the teacher is really, really busy. And it probably doesn't work very well with very low levels. But it's a great technique for generating conversations which come up out of the things that the students come up with. And you have a record of it, because each sentence is laid down, and then you go back and you can transcribe it, etc. So that was a kind of cool method, but it was very limited because of these restrictions on it and class size. The teacher had to be bilingual in the learner's L1 for a start, which is not always the case. But it reminds me very much of a method of teaching reading that was developed more or less the same time, in the 1960s, in my home country, which is? Oh, wow. Yes, exactly. Anybody from New Zealand here? Anybody come specially from New Zealand? Okay, so there was this woman. She was a primary school teacher called Sylvia Ashton Warner. And she was teaching in small rural schools in New Zealand, and she had to teach reading as the first language literacy, to these mixed nationality kids. When I say mixed nationality, they were all New Zealanders, a mixed ethnicity. So there was European ethnicity children and Polynesian or Maori ethnicity children. And for all of them, she was having to use textbooks which had been imported from Great Britain, because New Zealand was effectively a British ex-colony. So all the materials from Britain were about these little kind of white middle-class children saying, "Jump, John, jump," and "Look, Janet, look." And I mean, I learned to read using those books, but Sylvia Ashton Warner felt this is just simply not appropriate. It's not appropriate. The students can't engage with this. So what she did, she developed out of her own kind of she wasn't a very experienced or trained teacher. She was the wife of the headmaster of the school, so she had to teach the infants. That was her job. So she just developed, and she called it organic reading. So basically, what it involved is that the children, there would be a time in the day when the children would come and they would tell her a word that they wanted to learn. And she would write it on a piece of card. And she would give it to the child, and that word became theirs. And they would take it home, and they would learn it and look and recognize it, etc. And the next day they would bring their words back to the class. And if the card came back and it was very clean and untouched, and that she'd say, no, you obviously didn't own that word. I'm going to give you another one. But what was interesting was the words that they came up with that they wanted to learn were not words like jump or aeroplane or dog, but they were words with strong emotional appeal. They were words like kiss and hug or fight or knife or drunk. I mean, they were words that related to their own particular environment, yeah? And they had strong affective or emotional associations. And then with these words, once she was satisfied that they'd learnt them, they went round and they wrote sentences with these words onto the blackboard. And the blackboard's all the way around the room. And so they wrote sentences and they put these words into stories. And the stories became the basis of the reading texts that she would use for subsequent classes. So the stories that the students generated out of the words that they volunteered became the basis of the readers she used to teach reading. So that's why she called it organic, because it grew from the grass up. And these are some of the, I don't know if you can see them, but this is one of the stories. I went to the river and I kissed Lily and I ran away. Then I kissed Philippa. Then I ran away and went for a swim. Our baby is dead. She was dead on Monday night when Mummy got it. So this is strong stuff. These are 5 or 6 year olds. But they learnt to read and write using the words that they'd generated out of their own experiences. So it's a very similar methodological approach as that community language learning I was showing you. And there's very good grounds for supposing that this kind of experience, this kind of content matter, although it's risky, is extremely memorable. A very interesting experiment was done a number of years ago in Algeria by a researcher working through the University of Lancaster, I think, called Slimani. And she was interested in seeing what she called uptake. That is to say, what is it that learners remember after a lesson? And so she watched a number of lessons. These are adult learners at a university in Algeria. And what she was interested in is how many topics came up which were generated by the teacher or the textbook on the one hand, or by the learners themselves on the other. And predictably, most of the topics that came up in the lessons were generated by the teacher or the course book. Yeah. She said something like 70%. I think, well, that's actually seems to be quite, I would have put it higher. In other words, the kind of topics that the students came up with, like Jorge and his wedding, occupied only about 30% of the things that came up. When she tested the learners subsequently as to what they remembered about the lessons, what do you think they remembered? The teacher's topics or the learner's topics? We remember things about people we can identify with. And so that's the point, I think, about memory and about authenticity and about personalization. Here's another quick example. This comes from... no, I'll skip that. No, because we started to talk about memory, so let's talk about memory. So things can be memorable if they're personalized. That's one reason to personalize things, because it makes them more memorable, makes them stick. It also, not just for the student, Jorge, who'll remember that lesson, but the other students who were in the lesson, who talked about his wedding. Memory is, I think, one of the most I wouldn't say under-researched, but undervalued areas in language teaching. When you think about it, language learning is all about memory. I mean, mostly. It's about memory and practice, but memory, it's a huge challenge. But I don't mean memory of grammar so much. If you think about English, English actually doesn't have a lot of grammar. I'm telling you now. If you think it does, I mean, look at that. There's only 2 tenses. If we think past, present, future is not a tense because it's a combination of... There's 2 aspects, progressive and perfect. There's 2 voices, passive and active. And there are 9 modal verbs. That's the whole verb system. You can write it on the back of an envelope. It's very different from some languages that I know, like Spanish, where you have hundreds of different inflections. And I wouldn't be surprised if Armenian has a much more complex verb system than does English. But English has lost, over the period of time, it's lost a great deal of its complexity. There is complexity, obviously, because there's syntactic complexity, there's verb patterns. It's not as easy as that. But in terms of what you have to remember, it's relatively simple, the system. Vocabulary, on the other hand, is massive. First of all, you've got 100 function words, the auxiliaries, the prepositions, the articles, the particles, etc. You've got at least 3,000 lexical words that you need to know before you can get your foot in the door. Yeah? Both receptively and productively. And then there's X number of word combinations. So it's not just a matter of knowing a word like. You need to know like that, like this, I'd like something like, it's like, just like, look like, would you like something like that, like you, things like that, sounds like to know anything like that, and so on. All these different expressions. Because the bulk of what we produce when we speak English is formulaic. It's not individual words, it's sequences of words. It's chunks or formulaic language, or whatever you want to call them. Blah, 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 blah. 58, maybe 60% of spoken English is some kind of chunk, like these ones. And yeah, this is nice. This is Charles Simic, who's a Serbian poet who emigrated to the United States as a young adult. And he remembers, in writing in his memoirs of that experience of not speaking any English when he arrived in New York, but now he became the poet laureate of the United States. That's how well his English developed. When he started, he would go around, he said, the astonishment and embarrassment of speaking and not being able to communicate was deeply humbling. We've all had that experience. Quickly, I learned to keep my mouth shut, except when absolutely necessary. In the meantime, I read the movie marquees. That's the kind of like the hoardings over the cinemas, you know, advertising the movies. I tried to follow the TV and radio programs. In secrecy, I repeated words and phrases I overheard. Hey, smart Alec, crackerjack, chase butterflies, hogwash, hold the phone, go to the dogs. So he knew intuitively that he picked up all these little expressions that would give him a kind of foothold into, and it did. It worked. It was the start. So these are the expressions that count. And it's a view that, in fact, predates what we think of now as the lexical approach. We think of the lexical approach. Is that on your list of methods? The lexical approach. Anybody? No? Oh, interesting. Well, the lexical approach, in the 1990s, a man called Michael Lewis wrote a book called The Lexical Approach, a new approach to teaching English language teaching. And it situated learning heavily in lexis and vocabulary, not just grammar, but vocabulary, and not just vocabulary, but chunks, formulaic sequences, whatever you want to call them. But in fact, the lexical approach was predated by this man who was perhaps the genius, I mean, I hate to say it, but patriarch of English language teaching, a man called Harold Palmer, who worked primarily in Japan, but in the sort of 30s, and then went on to become he said, and he was asked, and this was in 1925, he was asked the question, what is it, finally, in one sentence, what is the answer to the question, how do you become proficient in English? And he summed it up in this, and this should be made into T-shirts and fridge magnets. It's such a good... He said, what is the most fundamental? It is this, memorize. There's the M word, perfectly. The largest number of common and useful word groups. Not words. Whenever I go to Korea or Japan, I'm always amazed. You sit in the subway in Seoul and you see these kids going to school and they're learning, memorizing words. It's good that they're memorizing, but they're memorizing. You look over their shoulders and say, words. Nobody ever, I don't know the meaning of that word. They have these books, the 10,000 most important words in English. This is based on no frequency data or whatever. It's just any old word, just learn it. But not word groups. We don't speak in words, we speak in word groups. We need to memorize things like that, something like this. That's what I like, etc. All the combinations of like. Notice it says memorize perfectly. You've got to get them right. You can't kind of get them wrong, these expressions, get them around the wrong way, because they sound funny. Yeah? You're crawling around on your hands and knees. That's what you do. You don't crawl around on your knees and hands. I mean, you do, but you don't say it like that. It's always black and white TV, not white and black TV. Why? Because it's both, but no, it has to be in that order. So that's what it means by perfectly. The largest number, as many as possible, of common, that is to say frequent, the most frequent ones. And now we have data which tells us what are the most frequent word groups in English because of corpus linguistics, all this information. It's not feeding through yet, but it's coming. Word group. So that's really, 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 really good advice. So while we're on the subject of memory, I'm really interested then in how do you do the memorizing? Because it's not so easy to tell your students, go away and learn 3,000 word groups. Although, I have to say, if I was running a language school myself and a student came in who was an absolute beginner in English, I would say, okay, here's the list of the 3,000 most common word groups. Off you go. Come back when you've learnt them all. And then we can start using them. No? But we do it completely the opposite. The student comes and we say, come in, I'm going to teach you some grammar. And more grammar, and more grammar. No words, just very few words, but more grammar, and more grammar, and more grammar. And the students know this, but they can't say it because they've got no words to put into the slots in the grammar. No. Other way around. You teach the vocabulary first, and then the grammar to kind of join it together. The grammar is the glue. But you can't have a building made just of cement. You've got to have bricks, and the bricks are the words. Okay, so I'm interested in how people learn things. And there are whole cultures in the world whose education system prioritizes memorization. Now, I don't know, I have no idea what it's like here in Armenia or whether it's the same in Iran or Singapore or wherever you're from, but certainly in China, there's a long tradition of memorization. So I was really interested to find this paper that came out a few years ago, and it's a study of memorization by English learners in China. Now, these English learners who were studied were successful. They were so successful that they had won national competitions in China speaking English. Not reciting English, but speaking English. Yeah? Speaking English without notes. I mean, they were really, really, really fluent speakers. And the researchers are interested, and they never traveled outside of China. How did these students get so good at English? And each of these students that the researchers studied had one thing in common. They had memorized huge amounts of text. They'd memorized their textbooks, basically, because it's part of the cultural tradition. And they hated it at first. They said, we didn't like it, we were made to do it. And then they started getting into it. And all of them said they regarded text memorization and imitation as the most effective methods of learning English. There you go, methods. There it is. Memorizing and imitation. Wow, that's amazing. These things went out of fashion when I started teaching. Imitation, repetition, drilling. No, that's not very communicative. And yet this is what they did. Memorize and imitation is the most effective. They had been initially forced to use it, I can't appreciate that. But they memorized whole text from their textbooks, and they turned it into competitions, and they'd practice these things on each other. And what was interesting was that when they talked about it, they said, as one of them reported, through reciting those lessons, he gained mastery of many collocations, phrases, sentence patterns, and other language points. And that's really interesting. It's not just words, but there's groups of words. He'd learned them also better than learning a list. He'd learned them in context. Now, some of these students went on to learn to memorize not just their textbooks, but screenplays of films, Hollywood films, by heart. Oh, heart. And not only the screenplay, but the intonation that went with them. So they'd watch these movies, they'd read the screenplay, downloadable now from the internet, of course, and they'd learn the intonation and all this expression. They learned one learned the whole of Taxi Driver with Robert De Niro. Don't know how useful that would be, but That's how keen they were and how important they saw this resource. Because when you think about it, it's a bit like a flash drive, a memory chip, isn't it? You just download this into your brain. It's a corpus. It's like 2 million words. And you just go bzzz, and you've got this thing in your brain, which you can then... And a number of them reported the fact that when they're writing compositions and they're trying to think of a nice expression, they'd sort of search in this memory base that they'd downloaded, as it were, and they'd find a nice expression and they'd use it, and they got much better results. Isn't that interesting? Now, I could never in 100 years get my students in Spain to memorize anything longer than a short, because it's not part of the educational culture. They would kill me. Their parents would kill me. There's a big movement in Spain at the moment against homework. I don't know how many, Spanish students have a lot of hours of homework, 5 or 6 hours at night sometimes. And the parents are worried for them, justifiably, because they're not getting out and they're getting anxious and they're not getting any better results. So there's a whole big movement. And last month, parents went on strike with their children and did 2 weeks without homework. That's how severe it is. So imagine saying to these parents, oh, yeah, by the way, I want little Juanita to learn the whole of her course book tonight. It's not going to happen. But actually, do you know what? They're memorizing things all the time. And do you know what they're memorizing in English? Songs, rhymes, but things they pick up. Internet. Little boys playing video games, which are in English. It's not very good English. It's like, take that, and, you know, you're dead, and all that sort of stuff. But nevertheless, it's in English. They're picking up this stuff, and they don't even realize it because they're being exposed to it. They're forgetting that they're even learning. But music, songs particularly, are fantastic. But also other things. This is the sort of thing that I do with my students. I give them jokes to remember, little jokes, kids' jokes. And they have to remember them. And then they have to tell them. And so you have an activity, and all the students are mingling. There's another M word. You know, they're walking around, and they've got their little joke. And they're going, did you hear about the... Well, here's some jokes. Here's some jokes beginning with M. Doctor, doctor, I lost my memory. When did it happen? When did what happen? It's a kid's joke, but, you know, at least it's clean. Here's another one. Have you heard about the 2 men who opened up a restaurant on the moon? The food was very good, but the place lacked atmosphere. But you see, even a 12-year-old Spanish kid can memorize something like that. And notice that actually there's some fantastic language embedded into these things. When did it happen? When did what happen? Wow, that's a really sophisticated sentence structure. And to get the intonation right, when did what happen? Yeah, is really, really cool. And similarly, this expression, the place lacked atmosphere. We talk about places lacking atmosphere, but not literally. Or the expression, have you heard about? Have you heard about? That's a fantastic little sentence starter. Have you heard about? Have you heard about the US elections? So these jokes embed a lot of really useful language. And of course, the students then are getting up and they go around and they tell their joke. And of course, nobody laughs because, you know, they didn't understand it. So they have to explain it. And that's good language practice. That's good language practice. And then they tell it again and they get a bit better. And then they tell it again and they get a bit better. Here's a couple more, beginning with M. I'd like a mousetrap, and please hurry up. I've got a bus to catch. Sorry, madam, we haven't got one that big. To catch a bus? Well, okay. Here's another one. How do you keep cool at a football match? Sit next to a fan. You see, so a lot of these play on words. But that kind of, you know, every language does that. And here's one I kind of like. Knock-knock jokes. Knock-knock, who's there? Mahatma. Mahatma who? My coat, please. My hat and my coat, please. Oh. I guess it's the way you tell it. Anyway, I got these from a book of children's jokes, but you can get them online, of course, now. Just Google jokes, kids' jokes, jokes about teachers, jokes about anything. There's thousands of them. That's the kind of thing that students could start memorizing. Not the whole textbook, but little jokes maybe, as a part of as I say. Okay. Oh, God, how are we going? 5 minutes? How many M's have we done? Let's just go. What was the first one? Method. Second one? Motivation. Then meaning. Then memory. Okay, how many? We've got 3 more. Okay, you want management now? Okay. Management, you got it. I hope you're seeing a connection here. Okay, management I'm not going to spend much time on, except to say that management is the most important thing that you learn to do as a teacher, apart from learning about the language. Language awareness is really important, but management is very important. And I calculate, and I've trained teachers who are novice teachers, have never taught before, and I've trained in-service teachers. And I think the difference between a novice teacher and an experienced teacher is that for the novice teacher, teaching is 90% planning and 10% management. But then as you get better and more experienced, you learn how to plan less and manage more, so that you can make more of what you can think on your feet, as it were. You get routines that become that chunk into larger routines, that become whole lessons. And I remember when I first started teaching, there's a few routines that I adopted, and I think this is fantastic. I can use this in any lesson, and it'll work. I can turn any piece of language into a dialogue. Dialogue was one of those things. So this is the part of, but as you become more proficient as a manager, you can plan less, which means you have more attention available to interact with the students like Jorge and take those risks and say, okay, tell us about your wedding. So that's management. And then I like the expression managing learning, which is really what teachers do. It's not just managing classes. It's not just managing students. It's not just managing people. It's not just managing groups. It's managing learning. And do I want to say anything more about that? I'd love to, but I'm going to move on because there's a way of managing learning which involves not just being outside of the learning process, but being part of the learning process. And this is where my secret M word that you didn't guess is really important, and that's the notion of mediation. There's a teacher mediating learning. There's a special kind of management where the teacher's in there. And it's the difference between, well, it's this, really. This is, here's a picture of a child learning to ride a bike. This is his mother. She's not sort of shouting from the sidelines. Stay on, hold up. She's there. She's mediating. She's part of the process. But as this child becomes more, if you like, fluent at bike riding, she can withdraw her actual physical help, though not her emotional help, until she's not there touching at all. And that's the nice image, I think, of what we understand by mediation. It's the view of learning that is captured in the notion also of scaffolding. Have you come across this term? Yes. Okay, so it's associated with socio-cultural learning theory, where all learning is co-constructed with the parent or the sibling or the teacher working with the learner or the child in the process. So teaching a game, teaching how to use a computer program, you have to be in there mediating, just like here. And you see it with learning first language literacy skills. You see good teachers do this. They're reading with the learner. And it's the difference between, I was just writing about this yesterday, actually, on the plane. Can you believe it? How sad is that, coming from Barcelona? And I was writing the difference between comprehension questions and comprehending questions. Now, comprehension questions are questions we ask after students read something or listened to something to see if they've understood. We're testing the product of their reading, the product of their listening. So we ask comprehension questions: who did what to whom, what does the text say about that, etc. And we get an idea of how much the student understood. But it's the after the process, it's testing the product. Comprehending questions are the kinds of questions you ask when the student is reading and having difficulties. And you say, well, what do you think this word means? Or so, well, what if you think he did, but then go back here, what does it say here? So the teacher's mediating. So it's a very involved process. It's a process, not testing the product, but it's helping with the process. At the point of need, which is another wonderful expression that was used a while back. Teaching at the point of need, when students need somebody to say, no, it's not that, you need, okay? So it's being involved. It's rolling your sleeves up and getting in there. It's exactly what Sylvia was doing in New Zealand with these kids. And she was in there helping them. And this is an activity you can do on Monday morning. And I did it every lesson with my teenage class in Barcelona. Would start with what is called a paper conversation. Paper conversation is having a conversation about the weekend or whatever, but it's writing. It's like texting. So they have one piece of paper, and they pass it backwards and forwards. And they write a question, and they pass it back. Now, why writing and not speaking? Well, writing is good because it slows down things a little. It gives people time to think. But it's particularly because it gives the teacher... You know how difficult it is to monitor students' speaking activity? You've got students over there, you've got students over there, and you can't run around. But this way, they're having an interactive activity. It's personalized. But the teacher, so students, this is my teenage students in Spain. Hello, Pablo. Hello, Albert. What did you do last weekend? It isn't your problem, he wrote. Now, I can see this. So I'm going around and say, we have an expression. We wouldn't say it isn't your problem, it isn't your business. And no, hang on. There's an even better. There's an expression in it. Mind your own business. Really useful for teenage boys to say to other teenage boys. Did you see Spain-Belgium match, the football? See, I enjoyed. He said, so I'm going in and I'm mediating, not at the exact moment, but I'm there helping them to correct this, and they can go back and then they can read it aloud to the rest of the class. And you've got fantastic data. And this went on for pages, these kids. They never ran out. Another thing is what teachers do, this is another M word, is modeling. And one of the things that I encourage my teachers to do is to model the task that you want the students to do first. So you want them to talk about the weekend, talk about your weekend. Nothing to be ashamed of, and actually quite interesting. And one of the feedback I got once from some students, I thought this was really interesting. Some students, this is a student says, I enjoy more when a teacher sits down in front of us and explains a real thing that happened to him or her, and then he asks us for similar situations that we have gone through. It's so simple. It's so simple. I'm going to tell you something, just listen. So you're modeling it. You're sharing, it's not made up, and then they do the same. And then you go in and you help them do it better. That's the mediating. Okay, so just to finish then. Methodology. Methodology, number 7. So what's the difference between method and methodology? Well, method is a thing, it's a construct. It's imported, it comes from somewhere else. It's either in the book or it's in the teacher training manual or whatever. It's an artificial thing, and perhaps we don't need methods, but we do need methodology. Methodology is what teachers actually do in their classrooms, what you do, what you're going to do on Monday, or what you did today. And I think this is what we need to be thinking about, our own particular methodology, which is the one which is the best one suited for our particular context. And so I want to try and bring these 7 different M's together and suggest, and here's first of all a definition of methodology by Mr. Kumarama himself. So he says, method are used to refer to established methods constructed by experts, imported, imposed, or whatever. On the other hand, I use the term methodology to refer to what practicing teachers actually do in the classroom in order to achieve their stated or unstated learning objectives, what they actually do. So as a teacher trainer, I feel that my particular interest is in methodology. Although, I have to say, and I'm just writing a book about methods, I think it is interesting looking at the history of methods, looking at the methods that have been used, tried, the reasons behind them, and maybe being, eclectic, saying, oh, I like that technique. I love the technique in community language learning of having the students build up a conversation on a tape recorder, or a cassette recorder, or a mobile phone. I think that's fantastic. So I love the technique. I don't think I want to buy the whole method, but I love the technique. So that's being eclectic in a kind of principled way. So this is my suggestion then of how we can bring all these M words together. And this is coming back to the beginning of the talk when I said, yes, the fun thing about writing that dictionary is I saw connections where I wouldn't normally have seen connections. So this is what I'm suggesting, that a methodology could be or should be, rather than a single method, one that motivates learners, by making the content of lessons meaningful, hence more memorable, through the management of interactivity, which is mediated in order to maximize learning opportunities. And those are my 7 M words. And I wish I could think of an M word to finish on. And all I can retrieve is from when I was living in Egypt, which is the Ma Salama for goodbye. So thank you very much for joining with me. I'm sorry it's been so crowded. I don't think we've got time for questions, but I will be seeing you tomorrow and subsequently. So again, thank you for your patience and enjoy. Thank you.